toggle back and forth if you can between the Zoom window and the up and coming window for this session.
Okay.
And that window has a chat, it has the polls, and I'll explain all this to everybody when we get started.
All right.
So I am going to get rid of my picture. At least I think I am. There we go.
Hey, Don, do you want to share the direct link to the up and coming page with me
Yes.
for the polls?
This should, I'm going to put it in the Zoom chat. That should open that window. Actually,
Oh, I already had it open. All right. A little double exposure.
I did, because the first one I sent just to you, and then I thought, you know, it might be when I talk about this, people might like that link. So Sally, the thing that if I understood this right, that if people use the chat that's in the Pathable window, that will be captured in the record of this session. If they use the chat in Zoom, that will not. Is that correct?
We're saving both. The one on the platform
Oh.
saves automatically, and I'll save the one on this Zoom as well.
Perfect, and we don't have to worry about it. So then I'm going to encourage everybody, Winston, to use the chat Zoom so that you don't have to jump back and forth for watching the two chats.
Actually, Don, I would encourage them to use the chat on the platform.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yes, I'll be able to save the transcript, not the chat on this.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
Let's see, what are we up to? 9 so far, okay. We'll give it a couple more minutes. I want to welcome everybody that's here. Thank you all for being on time. We're gonna see if anybody else shows up, which I'm expecting about 35 people. So we're still about 25 short.
I didn't know the Zoom, or is it just Pathable that does the transcript? That's really super helpful.
Oh, right, the transcribing at the bottom. It's amazing how fast it's doing that.
Is it Pathable that does that transcript?
The reason?
It's phenomenal. Zoom has got some competition on their hands.
Well, this is actually a Zoom window, and I
Right.
saw Deb shaking her head, so I'm thinking that is the transcribing happening in Zoom, Deb?
Yeah, I believe
Okay.
I'm saying that correctly.
It's Zoom.
Ah, okay.
Thanks,
Okay.
Sally.
I'm an educator, and so I'm really impressed with the Pathable platform. I've never used it before,
All right.
and it's phenomenal. So thank you for all you did to get this on Pathable.
We've been pretty happy with it.
In fact, my husband was fascinated with the game and wanted to use that for his middle schoolers.
Mhm.
Really? You get points for watching a video? I want that for my classroom.
Right.
Yeah, the high point score right now is at 2,000 points.
So for folks that are here, we're having a few more people come in. We're expecting about 35, and we're up to 10 so far. So I'm not going to wait too long, but I am going to give it a couple more minutes. Yes. And then somebody commented in the Zoom chat that they're having a little bit of problem moving back and forth between, I think what they were saying is they're having trouble moving back and forth between Zoom and the Pathable platform. And the one thing, and that's fine. I do have a number of polls that are in the Pathable platform. Only one of them came through. Oh, no, wait a minute. I'm sorry. There's a scroll bar. Yeah, they're all there. And I thought we would do one here, one there as we go through the session. So I'm hoping people will be able to move back and forth between them. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to start with some introductions first with me and Winston, and then I will do a little bit of introduction for all of you that are here. I'm Don Moffitt. I work with Illuminate, as in lighting the way forward together. And the thing that I do most is to work with startups like you all and co-ops on large capital investments like new stores. It's really trying to understand, like, what will it cost? How will it operate? And putting all that into pro forma financial statements, which we'll be looking at in more detail. I've been in the food business since 1981. I took what I thought was a 2-week job with Whole Foods Market back when there was just one small store. And it was a lot of fun. And I wound up being the VP of store development I was a store manager. I was a regional president. And I left there. I have a degree in architecture and an MBA now. I left and got the MBA after I was with Whole Foods. And became the project manager for Durham Co-op Market. And through that, got involved with people at CDS Consulting Co-op, including Bill Gessner, and which is now, CDS is now Illuminate. And I'm delighted to be here. Winston, you want to say a few words?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you all. I'm Winston Estes. I have been working with Natural Foods Co-ops since 1992. I have worked in mostly in operations capacity that entire time, everything from being a cashier to a grocery manager to a project manager for a large natural foods retailer in the Midwest, to now working with Illuminate as a consultant performing IGM services, project management services for building out new stores and retail operations optimization. So I love working with co-ops and love them in all phases. So excited to be talking to you about yours and the planning of your fabulous vision for your community.
And when Winston says IGM, that's short for interim general manager. We have a team of people, including Winston, who often co-ops call on them to come and run, be the GM for a period of time, often in a turnaround situation, but also sometimes at opening. Let's see, my goal for you all today is pretty simple. It's that you leave with at least one new insight. Somebody told me once that if you're going to spend your time doing something like this, you should always leave with at least one new insight. So that's my goal. I have some polls that I'm hoping people can do, and they're on the workshop session page that you used to enter the workshop today. So we're looking at Zoom right now. I assume most of you are. And then if you're able to toggle between this and the session window where it's got chat and polls and so forth, that would be great. Ideally, if you have things that you want to share in chat, we'll do it on the platform, on the up and coming platform, because that will be captured in the record of today's session. And the polls are over there as well. So let's see. The first poll is just to get you limbered up and see how it goes. So if you would go over to the polls, and the first one says enter questions for the speaker, but the second one is what's your name, your co-op's name, and city and state. So Bernadine's already been there and done it. Thank you.
And Bernadine, there are more than one or so startups in Chicago. Can you tell us your co-op's organizing name?
Right, you should be able to go back and do another or. Welcome, Cheryl. So I'm waiting to see if anybody else is able to. There we go, get a couple more. Long Beach. Cultivate. South Side. Okay, thanks, Bernadine. Bay City, Joe, thanks. Okay. Then, so there's a second poll, or the next poll down is where are you in your co-op creation journey? If you could, it's going to be by stage. It's pretty simple. If you could do that and just tell us, give us an idea of like where people are.
I'm just going to break in. When you're looking at the main page on the up and coming workshop splash page, there's the chat, and then there's tabs to the right of that. There's polls, there's files. And so if you're having trouble finding the chat, the poll window, look at the right of your information page about the workshop, and there's a bar, a menu bar at the top of that chat section that'll show you polls, files, and people.
In fact, I can show you right now. I just realized. So here is this is the pathable window. You had a join meeting. Here's the tabs that Winston's talking about, and here are the polls. So let's see, what do we see here? I would think, let's see, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen again. Maybe I pushed a button I shouldn't have, but if I did, I will tell you what it says. Okay, so I'm not sure, it didn't show up on mine. It might have showed up on yours. And this is what it looks like. So 20% of the folks here today are in stage 1. 60% is pretty much where I kind of expected most of you would be, feasibility and planning. And a good 20% of you have moved to the preparing for construction, which implies a site and in the middle of preparing working documents and arranging financing and so forth. So that's great. Let's see here. Okay, so today's going to be interactive. I spent a little bit of time debating about whether to use breakouts, and at 14 people, which is where we are now, this is not going to be a challenge. But even with 30, I thought, there's some new concepts, and it would probably be better to have facilitated discussions. So it's up to you all to participate. I want you to use your microphones, make comments, use the chat, hopefully on the Pathable up and coming window. But if you need to use the Zoom chat, we're watching that too. Let's see here. Okay, so for the agenda, let's see, I've got a little presentation to help me keep track, which is here. And let me pop this into presenter mode. So here we are, vision and financial sustainability, and Winston, and there are the introductions. And then this is today's agenda. We've already done number 1, right? We've done the introduction. So we're going to talk about a little bit about vision. We're going to talk about values related to the vision. And we're going to talk about the intersections where it intersects with finance. So this is building on the session just before this one. And if you went to that one, there'll be a little bit of repetition. And if you didn't go to that one, we'll cover some things pretty quickly. And then we're going to discuss impacts of vision on outcomes. So what's in a vision? Well, as if those of you who were at the earlier session, it starts probably in my fantasy around a kitchen table, somebody saying, discussing problems in the community, and someone saying, you know what we need to do? We need to start a co-op, right? There's the idea. And then it germinates. And then people start building on that. And by this point, it may still be very hazy, or you may have some very specific ideas about where it's going to go, what part of the community you want to be in, what kind of products you want to sell, how big it's going to be. And that vision is part of the narrative that you use. It becomes the story of your startup. You use it to raise money and to get people to join your effort. And if everything works well, you celebrate when you cut the ribbon, but you really celebrate 5 years later because it turns out it's actually sustainable, right? And that's the goal. So I have another little poll, which is just to get a sort of sense. It's called a free text entry. And the idea here, what are the parts of the vision? It's just anything you think of, right? There's no wrong answer or right answer, but you can say, well, when we talk about our co-op, we talk about like location, we talk about size, we talk about, I don't want to say too many words because I want these words to be your words. Let's see here.
So I'm not sure if we're able to see who inputs what in this area, but we do have a response about prioritizing good wages.
Okay, good. That's part of somebody's vision. Solving a food desert problem, food insecurity, that's part of somebody's vision. So friendly store, local produce, good wages. There's 15 of you out there. I want to see what everybody's got. Sustainable local food, good. Okay. Yeah, empowering community, access to healthy food, flagship store.
Got the comment transforming how people get food.
Yeah, this is it. You're thinking about like, why are you working so hard on it, right? What is it about this that really turns your wheels? What will you buy there? I love this. Okay. Keep entering if you want. I want to see if we can do a little bit of this. And Winston, I'm going to need your help to keep an eye on the poll. And let's see. Everybody stay with me. Let's see here. Okay, great. So I'm going to switch over to a whiteboard. And this is where everybody gets to participate, right? We're going to pull some of the things out of the poll that you did, but really let's talk about whatever you come up with, right? So we're going to start by talking about vision. So I heard local products. I heard fair wages. I heard good wages. Give me some more ideas here, Winston, or anybody. Everybody has your microphone on, just speak up.
encouraging the local farmers to work together. And then challenge the, transform how people get food.
So, okay.
And then the more than a grocery store.
A community gathering place.
Great, thank you. What about, is anybody thinking yet in your vision, as some of you are already in the stage 3A, so you must be here. What about size, right? Or what is the aesthetics of the co-op? Is it spare? You know, is it utilitarian? Is it elegant? What about the products you're going to sell, right? Are you looking to sell natural and organic, or do you want to sell perishable products, or you want to be a conventional grocery store? These are some of the things that are likely in your vision, right? When you're talking to people and you say, join our co-op, we're going to, it's that rest of that sentence.
I know a co-op I'm talking to right now is really excited about selling sandwiches and prepared foods. Like, we're going to make our own recipes.
Yeah, deli counter, cafe. And food that, we have a very diverse community. So all sorts of foods that the different communities would enjoy.
Okay.
And I think also, Jamie, you might have mentioned, or someone mentioned, community space. So that can look a lot of different ways. How do we achieve that? What's that look like in your store?
Yeah, I said a community gathering place.
You know, I think
We're
of those
also
as,
looking.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're also looking at a community kitchen, someplace where classes can be held, and people, I mean, maybe catering is done through there. Maybe people can rent it out as a commercial kitchen for their cottage food when they've gone up to the next level and they need a commercial kitchen.
Okay. Okay. When I hear community gathering place, I think of the Durham Co-op Market here in town, and because it's a community gathering place, but they don't have a community room that people can use for their meetings. It's a place where people come and gather. So I hear both of those. So I think it's good they're both up like this. We can talk about more. As people think about things, let's get them up there. I
I just want to kind of add one more prompt here. Just maybe this will stimulate folks. Is your store is not only on the inside of the four walls, right? Is there anything significant about what the environment or the site would offer?
A community garden.
Right, like even the location sometimes, you know, some people have a vision of, you know, being some sort of wellspring in the middle of nothing. Other people have a really dense urban environment kind of vision, or, you know, shaping goal.
Okay, so I'm going to put, go ahead.
I think it should have parking.
Okay.
Is that Jacqueline Hanna? There's one person that is really, really good about reminding us all that, you know, most retailers do need some amount of parking.
I think what I want to do is maybe let's not get caught up in what the values are behind that. Let's talk about how these things impact, how these might intersect with finance. But before we do, I'll tell you what, let me leave this. Let me switch over. Give me a moment. Oh, okay, so yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna get you back to here. And we'll do this. We're gonna skip on values. But I just want to point out that the values are behind the vision, right? When you all talk about, we want to be more than a grocery store. Behind that is a value, or like we want local farmers working together. You might have a value that's collaboration. When you talk about fair, good wages, you're talking about fairness, right? You're talking about treating people with respect and equity. When you talk about a community gathering place or community room, it's talking about supporting, there's a value behind that. But we're going to stay with visions and how that intersects with finance. So there's a couple more polls for people to look at. If you go over to the session, these are just to kind of gauge how people feel, because we're going to start looking at financial statements, and this will help me understand like where you are. One of them says, yeah, familiarity with financial statements, and the other is the pro forma, if you would do both of those. Let's see. Let me do this. Okay, so I'm going to show you, because I'm not sure why, but I don't need to know why. Nope, showed you too much. This.
So how familiar are you with financial statements? Is a multiple choice poll statement?
So this one that we're looking at, can you see that, Winston, the bar chart?
Yep.
Okay, so this is saying that 50% of the people are saying income statements, I get it, the others not so much. All right, that's great. That's great information. And so nobody all the way through to find cash flow statements, okay? So we're going to spend a little time talking about financial statements then. And let's see what people said about the pro forma. We don't have a pro forma yet, okay? And 17% say, we have a pro forma, but it's confusing. And 17% are like, I got that part. But that's fine, that's good.
That's
okay.
Amazing.
What's amazing you, Winston?
That you have your pro forma and you're just comfortable, you're feeling really good and well seated. That's great. At least that's the way I'm reading the 57%. Oh no, we don't have a pro forma. Whoops. Sorry. I thought misinterpreted that one.
Yep. There's 13% that have a pro forma, 38 have a pro forma, 13% in all are comfortable with knowing how it works. All right. Let's see here. So I'm juggling on, appreciate your patience as I juggle things back and forth. You should see the presentation now. And what I want to do is to think about, so we're going to jump around a little bit, but now I want to like start thinking about the end, right? When we talk about outcomes, and we're talking about financial outcomes, right? I'm wondering if you guys can tell me what kind of financial outcomes, if you say, well, these are the kinds of things I would like to, let's see, do I have that on a, no, okay. So let's just talk about it. Any ideas? Like, well, we're going to get a pro forma, right? And those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it covers a period of time from the beginning of your work to opening, and then for 10 years after that. And, you know, the goal is for a co-op, it's sustainable financially. So you say, okay, what are some of the outcomes that we might be looking for in the pro forma? The pro forma is going to indicate that something. And let's see here. Just wondering if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Are we going to make money?
Okay, so making money is an interesting. So I'm going to call that net income for now. Anybody else?
We want to have about 200,000 cash on hand to start and see our, and not have the cash diminishing over our 10 years.
Okay, so you want to maintain a balance of 200,000. That's good, of cash. So let's see, we're on mural. So I'm going to take you up here. I'm going to just walk you through a couple of things here. So the first is this, which is, this is a really simplified sort of diagram about grocery store operations financially, right? So if you think about it, right, this would represent all of our sales, right? If we're in the retail business, this is our revenues. And that can be divided into two parts. What we pay for all the products that we sell, and what's left is called the gross profit. As a percentage of sales, it's a gross margin. Now we can take that little box and we can split it into two parts. We can split it into the cost of personnel, which is your wages and your benefits and taxes, payroll taxes. That's all in this top box. And then the leftover. We call the leftover margin minus labor, right? Pretty simple. Margin minus labor, we got this. That little box has to pay for the rent and the utilities, the supplies, all of the expenses of operating the store outside of personnel. And what's left at the end of the day is, in round terms, it's EBITDA or EBITDAP, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and patronage. Now, that is, you can think of it as the core earnings from operating the store. The EBITDA has to be enough. We're going to talk about debt service in a minute, but it has to be enough to pay the cost of any debt that the co-op has. And once it does that, now I'm talking in general terms, but once it does that, what's left over at the end of the day is going to be cash. So in service of keeping our co-op open, cash is good, right? So if we can do enough sales and limit our expenses enough that we have enough cash, we have enough after all of that to pay our debt service and have some cash left over, we are in the sweet spot of sustainability. Now, I'm going to look at this a little bit broader. Remember, I said that the pro forma covers 2 periods of time. So first, let's look at the first one, right? The first one is from when you started to opening day. And the first thing that we look at is, like, how much is this co-op going to cost to open? What are the uses of the funds that we're going to raise? How are we going to use them? I have a simplified pro forma I'm going to share with you, but it's going to be, everything in this box is going to be things like construction, equipment, your startup, the money you'll spend on personnel prior to opening, the money you'll spend on marketing prior to opening, the fees that you pay for a pro forma, a market study, the architects and engineers, legal assistance, all of those costs are going to be over here. It's going to be impacted by how big your store is. And that's going to be part of your vision, right? How, like when people, even if you're not thinking size, you might be thinking limited assortment, or we're going to have a full service store. We're going to have a deli. We're going to have a community room. All those things are going to have to be inside the four walls. They're going to have to get built. They're going to have to be equipped. For example, one thing that we talked about in vision, somebody said, we want to have a community kitchen that people can lease. Okay, and if that happens to be exactly what the co-op needs, then there's a cost associated with that. But if it happens to be something in addition or different, or you have to add to what the co-op needs for its grocery operation, then there are costs associated with that. So all that goes over here. And even aesthetics. So when we were doing the Durham co-op market, one of the things the architects designed in that I like to talk about is floor to ceiling ceramic tile in the bathrooms. The walls in the bathrooms in the co-op are sheetrock. They're not floor to ceiling ceramic walls. It was a beautiful ceramic, a beautiful aesthetic decision that cost. So it's gone. And all of those decisions that the co-op makes in development have an impact on how much it's going to require to open it. Okay.
Don, can I make a point to that?
You may, sure.
To celebrate and remind us of Bill Gessner, Bill would say you can do anything you want, you just have to pay for it.
Right.
So those uses, if that's a core commitment, or you think it's a durable value overall, that you have those impermeable finishes that protect against water damage, et cetera,
Right.
or that sustainability is a controlling, enduring value for your co-op, or a variety of other things that are a value that also increase costs, or can, or typically do increase costs. It's a conversation. It's not that, oh, it's costs more than the stripped down version, therefore we can't have it. It's, you have to make a decision, but you can do what you need to do, want to do, that reflects your core values. It just changes what your sources and your uses. You have to update that.
Right. And that's exactly right. And as we'll talk about before we're done, we'll talk about at the end, it actually becomes an iterative process, right? Because here's what happens. Once you make those decisions, you have to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for all of this, right? That's what Winston was just saying. You can do what you want, but you have to pay for it. And I'm dividing the sources of funds, all those places are coming from, into not loans and loans. So your not loans are going to be, if you get 1,000 people who get excited by your vision and they join, then 1,000 times whatever the cost of joining is money going into your account, so that to help pay for the startup. If you can get grants from or just straight out donations. I didn't work with Oshkosh, but my understanding is that they raised a lot of money in donations. So all of that goes here, the bigger you can make this white box, the smaller the pink box is. And the pink box matters. And this is both preferred shares, which is not a loan, and all of the loans, including member loans, right? Because the reason I put preferred shares down here is that the goal is to pay dividends as like you would pay interest on loans, and to someday redeem those shares just like you would pay back a loan. So they are better for the finances of the co-op and the flexibility of the board. But in terms of looking at the overall picture, they operate very similarly to loans. So all of whatever it takes down here in the pink box, you're going to have to pay dividends or interest and eventually return it to the people who lend it to you or invest in you. That's the debt service. Now I'm including preferred shares there. So the debt service that the co-op has every year is the total of the interest expense and the total amount of loan repayment for the year, right? Okay, so now if you think about what we looked at up here, there's debt service. And this is sort of the same thing right here, right? You have your sales once you open, because remember the second period of time in the pro forma is the first 10 years of operation. So we say, okay, you had all these pre-opening things and they led to a bunch of not loans and then loans, including preferred shares. So what does that look like? You start with sales and you say, oh, we have a cost of goods sold, right? So that's going to be based on like how much you have to pay for your food. And a co-op with a small volume of purchases may pay more for it than a co-op with large volume of purchases, which may pay more than a major chain. So there's what you're paying for it, and then what you're pricing it at, right? Because, excuse me, I'm sorry, that's the cost of the goods sold. Then what you're pricing it at is going to determine your margin. And you always have the one thing that goes into cost of goods sold, if your sales are not high enough and you can't sell everything because it becomes unsaleable, it spoils, that's a cost of the goods that you actually sell, right? Because you have to pay for that as well. So you've got that, you've got personnel, you've got all those other expenses. You also have to cover debt service. And then what's left is cash flow. Right? So we're going to look at this a little more closely, but that's the role that debt plays. And it's the role that all of the parts of your vision play, right? Because all of the parts of your vision start going in over here, like what is it going to take to make this co-op happen? And they also go over here, like what are wages like? How the size of the store is not only going to impact its cost to develop it, it's also going to impact rent and utilities. The lower the sales are in the same space, the higher the rent utilities will be as a percentage of sales.
I think the other thing that when we talk about the size of store is when you're installing refrigeration, heat, ventilation, air conditioning, et cetera, some of the mechanicals are going to be about the same cost for a small format as they are for a larger format, because there's a baseline there, right? You have to put, these units on your roof or on the exterior of your store, and it's going to cost them a certain minimum to do that, for that install. The other consideration when you're looking at size and whatnot is how efficient is your store? Do you have to stock it once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day?
Right. And the first store I worked in at Whole Foods, we had very small back rooms. It was a small store. So when trucks came, we had to unload them directly onto the floor, right? So that became a real problem in itself, just moving around the store. So there's a lot of different elements that go into it. What are the loading facilities and so forth? So what I want to do is I'm going to switch over to the pro forma. I have this is a very simplified pro forma. It is really 4 tabs down here at the bottom, 4 worksheets. And those of you who have a pro forma, your pro formas, if you got them from me, they probably have 13 worksheets. And they're interactive. So when you change something in one place, as this one is, it changes it throughout. So I wanted to really simplify this. I'm gonna first talk for a minute about financial statements, because a lot of people indicated, like, what we got income statements, right? Okay, so income statements is your revenues. In our case, it's sales. And if you remember the diagram, the first thing we do is subtract off what we pay for the food, which leaves us with our gross profit. And then in this version, this is different than what I typically do, but I wanted to show it this way. You've got personnel expense. That's both your wages and your taxes and benefits. And that leaves you with margin minus labor, right? That was that little box at the bottom, which has to pay for everything else. And then, so that takes you down to your net income. So the income statement is showing you all the activity within a period of time. It's all the activity that's going on related to the business of running the co-op. I'm really not saying that quite right, because there is other activity that's happening at the same time and is not on the income statement. I'll give you an example. I walk into your co-op after you've opened. I look around and I say, man, this is great. I love this place. I want to be a member. And I'm going to write you a check and become a member. That money is not on the income statement, right? It is not part of the business of selling groceries. What you've done, instead of selling something to that person, you didn't sell them a membership, you traded them one share of ownership for that check. That's a balance sheet transaction. The balance sheet records certain things that happen that are not, and I'm going to show it to you in a minute, and we'll talk about what those things are. But there are things that happen, some day to day and some bigger, but they're not things that show up on the income statement. The other thing to know about a balance sheet is that the balance sheet itself is like a picture. So you can get a balance sheet at any point in time, and it's simply like a photograph of the health of the business. In our case, we're looking at 1 year periods. So we're going to look at the income statement over a year. How much sales did the co-op do during the entire year? What was their personnel expense during the entire year? But the balance sheet is the picture at the end of the year. So at the end of year 1, this particular model is for a co-op. It had about 184,000 in cash. It has assets, which are things that it owns. It has liabilities, which are things that it owes. And it has equity, which is what the co-op is worth. In a balance sheet, the assets, or what it owns, always equals how much it's worth plus how much it owes. So assets always balances with liabilities and equity. And another way to think about it is that assets are all the things that we have, and then we have to pay for them. We either pay for them with external funds that we go out and get other people to give us, liabilities, or it's with internal funds. It's from things like our members wrote a check to become a member, and therefore that's part of our internal funds. It also includes our profits from prior years, because we can put that in, that becomes part of the worth of the co-op. We can use those to pay for the things that we have. So there are things, so current assets, because I was expecting people to be a little, this is not, I've rolled up a lot of things into a simplified form. A current asset will be inventory. So let's talk about inventory for a moment. The staff buys inventory. It comes in the door, they put it on the shelf, customers come and they buy it and they carry it out. The cost of goods that we talked about on the income statement is the cost of the products that were sold. It's not the cost of the products that the co-op bought, because some of those are sitting on the shelf, right? So here, like, think about this. Let's look at this balance sheet. At the end of year 1, it had 285,600. Now let's just assume that that's all inventory. 285,600. So at the end of year 2, that's gone up about $4,700. So what does that mean? That means that the staff, over the course of the year, purchased $4,700 worth of inventory that didn't get sold, right? They added that much to the inventory. So at the end of the year, we have that much more inventory than we had at the beginning. I did my numbers wrong. It's actually 5,700. But the point is that the new inventory figure is this one. And if we want to know what happened during the year, we do what I just did. What was it at the beginning? What was it at the end? What's the change? That change indicates what actually happened. So for example, if you look at current liabilities, current in a balance sheet always means 12 months. Current assets are things that you can turn into cash within 12 months. Current liabilities are things that you owe within 12 months. The current liabilities, which is going to probably be almost all accounts payable, it went up $7,000, $6,500. And so what that means is that this co-op has borrowed from its vendors $6,500 more than it had at the beginning of the year. They've increased their debt. It's very short-term debt, but at the end of the year, that's what they owe their vendors. And because they increased their debt, that actually has an impact on cash, right? If you had to pay it, you would have $6,500 less. If you borrow it and you don't have to pay it, your cash is going up by $6,500. So you can see that there are things happening on the balance sheet that are not recorded in the income statement, but they impact cash. And that's why the cash flow statement is where the magic happens. It combines this photograph year to year, in our case, what we're looking at, of what we own, what we owe, and what we're worth. It combines that with the operations of what's going on sort of day to day on the income statement. So the cash flow statement is this part here.
Hey, Don.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just gonna, so Don's doing a great job of showing you like, all right, so now you're open and these are the things that are happening with your operation. You've got inventory, you've got labor, you've got these things that are happening that are impacting your cash on hand, and we're about to hit the cash. But then I was just kind of flipping back to the beginning. When you were planning your project, part of what you did was you did incur some debt. So that kind of like, that's the tie of like, there were certain costs that went into getting the store open. And so that is part of what the then operation has to operate strong enough to cover. So you start with these things that gave you a beautiful store to operate, and then that operation has to then cover the costs associated with becoming a brick and mortar retail service. So I was just kind of flipping back of like, you had the pro forma pre-opening that produced your plan and you know, said what your plan was going to cost. And now you're at the open. And so we're kind of walking through, you know, the actual, what happened from that sources and uses now to that plan implemented. So when you're developing your pro forma, you're going from your vision and then seeing the impacts of that vision and what you need to do to be a healthy, sustainable business.
Great, thank you. Sometimes I get off on the weeds, and it's really helpful if someone goes, okay, can you bring that back to reality? Let me show you what Winston's talking about. If you look at between year 1 and year 2, this other debt is going to be long-term debt. And between year 1 and year 2, it goes down about $42,000. Well, what that means is that this co-op spent $42,000 roughly. It didn't spend the money. It took money out of its cash and returned it to the lender, right? So that is something that's not on the income statement. In addition, so that's about $42,000 in cash that it needed to have in order to repay debt that comes, as Winston pointed out, from decisions that were made opening the store. And the other thing is, when you scroll down here, the interest side of debt service is actually a business expense. So they also spent $71,000 in interest in year 2, right? So they had a big debt, they owe a lot of interest, and they've got to return some of it to their lenders. So that all shows up in these two. The balance sheet pulls that back together. And so what I do is we start with depreciation. Excuse me, I lost myself. We start with net income. Now we add back depreciation because it's a business expense. Now I covered this in my session earlier, but in case you weren't there, I have a really simple explanation. So let me just give me a minute. And this is my explanation. I used it in that session. If your co-op goes down the road and you say, well, we need a refrigerated case. It costs $7,000. When you buy it, there's no business expense. And the reason is that you have just traded an asset, which is cash, $7,000 in cash, for an asset, which is a refrigerated case, $7,000. So the co-op is still whole, right? The assets changed, cash went down, refrigerated equipment went up, but nothing else really changed. So there's no expense. What we say is that refrigerated case probably has a useful life of 7 years. So we're going to depreciate it over 7 years. We're going to take 1/7 of its value and subtract that as a business expense. So when we add up all the items in the store for the year, we can say the total depreciation expense was, and if we look up here, it was $205,000 in year 2. So they have a lot of assets and they're depreciating them. But no cash went out the door to pay for this expense. The cash went out the door back when that refrigerated case was purchased, right? The business was whole, but this is the cost of owning all that stuff, and no cash is now leaving the store. So we add it back to our net income. So this is net income. If you added those two together, that's net income before depreciation. But we also add back interest because I want to show you debt service as a whole. And remember, interest is on the income statement. So I'm adding it back now. And then we have some changes like in inventory or in accounts payable. And we're adding all that back, and the core cash flow. Now we're talking about cash flow, dollars in, dollars out. This co-op in year 2 sent $95,000, $95,462, went out the door more than came in. They also invested another $15,000 or so in their assets, right? This was that new refrigerated case, or it was major repairs, or it was updating the leasehold because something got banged and it needed to be repaired. So they spent about $15,000 in our estimates. This is future, so we're thinking they will spend. But all those people who got excited like I did and came in and joined the co-op, wrote checks, they actually bought $43,200 worth of equity. So there's money coming in from that. So debt flow before cash flow before debt service is when we add up those three: operations, investment, and equity. Then we look at the interest expense and the principal payments. So they spent $112,000 on debt, and that's the cash flow after debt service. All right, those are the financial statements. Now I'm going to pause. I'm just going to ask. I've just been blathering here. So does anybody have any questions about this? Is there anybody that's like, I don't really get balance sheets yet or cash flow? Silence means I'm doing really good here. I mean, silence means on your part that you're doing really good. Okay. And Winston, you're keeping an eye on the chat?
Yep.
Okay, great. It does look like, let's see, wait a minute. Let me look at the chat on Zoom. I see what's over here?
I think Jamie's got her hand up though.
Oh, call on her, please.
All right, Jamie, unmute, please.
Hi, it's Janine. And I just reluctant because I feel like I'm doing a lot of the talking at the group here, so I apologize for that. But you know, I see so many red numbers, and why should I not be freaked out by that?
Right. So that goes to the sort of one of the purposes of the pro forma that I have in creating it is to give you the opportunity to look at the what ifs, right? It's to say, well, what if we spend a little less? What if our store is a little smaller? What if we can get a little higher gross margin, right? You have to look at what does it take to get to sustainability? And then you have to be really clear-eyed about, can we actually achieve that? Because ultimately you're going to ask your friends, your neighbors, your family members to invest in this. And you want to be sure that when you do that, there's a a reasonably good, it's reasonably assured that they're going to be able to get those funds back over time. That whatever you promise to do, that you're going to be able to do that. So when you start with these red numbers, you say, okay, like this isn't working, but this is pretty common for first time out of the box with a new co-op. And you say, okay, it's not working. What do we need to look at, right? What do we need to think about? I also saw something in the Zoom chat that, oh, okay. Let's see.
So I'm sorry, I was reading and I missed a little bit of what Don mentioned, but with the red, also Janine, the thing that we've tried to plan for with startups or a business significantly changing or moving into a new neighborhood or something like that is that there's an experience curve. There's a learning curve. Of you haven't been grocers before, your staff in all likelihood haven't been the grocer to the service that you build. And so everybody's sort of learning, the neighborhood's learning, the customer is learning, and the staff are learning. And primarily the staff have the greatest impact on the number. So you don't build a store and peak in the first month. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. So you're going to grow into yourself. So that also shows a little bit of red. Well, not a little, like there's a significant amount of red as you're growing. And it's uncomfortable. It definitely is uncomfortable. But the fact of the matter is, a pro forma is a plan, right? It's like, okay, we're planning for this. We know we're not going to be profitable out of the gate. We know that we're going to put a lot of investment up front and that we're going to be paying that down and managing that investment over the long haul. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what always freaks me out is the red numbers, and I have to keep reminding myself that the pro forma, just like the title of your pro forma says, is a what if. And it's what if we do it as planned with the number of employees and the square footage and the purchases. Is that correct?
Yes. It is to allow for a co-op to spend some time, people in the co-op, looking at what are some of the ways that we can reflect on our vision and what the impacts are having. And that's what we're going to try. I'm going to take you over and talk a little bit more about sources and uses. But I do want to comment that people are asking us, Jennifer asked in the chat, hey, if we're trying to recruit people who can understand the pro forma, what should we be looking for? And, this is a spreadsheet, right? So you could start with as basic as someone who works with Excel and understands Excel. But if you had somebody who runs a business, all right, they'll be familiar with parts of this. If you can get somebody involved in your co-op who does bookkeeping, they'll be familiar with more of it. If you can actually get somebody involved in your co-op who's a CPA, an accountant, they're going to understand, or actually somebody who's gotten education and training in finance, which is just about anybody within a master's of business. They'll be able to help look at it and interpret it and walk you through it. But if we work together, that's part of my job. That's part of the services that you get. We'll be working with you and your board on what I call financial literacy. It's not pejorative. I'm just saying I want to help everybody understand, and there'll be a core group that are more comfortable and other people who are less comfortable. But the idea will be, let's really dig into this and make sure that you understand how it works and what's driving it. We're going to do some more of that right now.
I just want to jump in as far as like what are the qualities and the qualifications of the founders and the people that you want to bring into your board. And honestly, before any of us were CPAs or masters of business or whatever, we're just normal people with a lot of interest and patience.
Right, that's perfect.
It's,
Right.
Highly invested people are gonna, they'll have the patience to learn it. And they'll also have the commitment to learn it. And I think a broad perspective, in addition to, an expert perspective is always, important.
So the other thing I'll say is that way that I've learned over the years is by saying to someone who's now in my position, wait, stop, back up. Tell me that again, because I didn't get it the first time. Don't be afraid to ask. I have yet to hear a question, and I've worked with 80 or 90, I think somewhere around 80 co-ops. I have yet to hear a question I thought was inappropriate, right? I mean, people are just trying to understand, and that's our job. So let's look at sources and uses, right? Now remember, I put these in this order because this is the order we actually think about it. Remember that uses of funds here, this is the cost of getting the store open. It starts with the first time the first check you wrote, right, was for something that went towards opening the co-op. All of that should be included, and it should take you right up to opening day. So this particular model had a place where, so if someone says, well, what if we bought our own property and built a shell, and instead of leasing it, what would that do? We can look at that. It's got construction, right? It's got the size of the co-op up here. This is when we start out, when we're looking at something like, well, what's construction going to take? What are the interior improvements? What's that going to cost, right? We're looking at some ballpark number based on more or less what other co-ops have spent. It's really hard to do apples to apples because this cost is going to be dependent on not only on the size, but what's the condition of the space? What is the landlord going to do before you have to start your work? How much work are they putting into it? So it starts with where that space is today. Then you add what the landlord's doing, and that gets you to what you're going to start with. All those costs. So right now we have this ballpark estimate. As you go through this process over time, you'll be able to start refining this. When you have your space, you'll get a fixture plan. You can sit down with a contractor who has experience with grocery stores and say, look, this is the grocery store. This is kind of what we're thinking about finishes. And they can look at the space and say, well, don't hold me to this, plus or minus 25%. It's probably going to cost you. And now we have a number to put in here. That's no longer just like some dollar figure per square foot, but that's where we start. With equipment, if you have that fixture plan, you can begin making a list of everything that store is going to require. The refrigeration equipment, not just the cases, but the compressors, the condensers, the installation. You can make a list of the kitchen equipment that's going to go under the hood if you're doing a kitchen where you're cooking, the stoves, the steamers, all of that. And you can begin to price it. The inventory is based on a square foot basis. The fees are an estimate based on all of these costs. And as we go forward, you'll start getting more and more information about what the actual fees are. In this particular co-op, I've added in $75,000 for an outside expert to help the co-op with design, construction, equipment, those kinds of things. Some startup administrative expenses, like things like, and this is really the idea here is like the general manager is going to need a place to work until the store is available. They're going to need a place to interview candidates for department managers. The department managers will need a place to interview candidates for their clerk positions. So renting some office space, buying computers, we've got 20,000 in here for that.
Paying for the internet, Spectrum's got to get its money.
Right. Cell phones, all those expenses. Printer paper. A startup promotion is marketing, right? So now this is all in uses of funds this is money for the general manager to market. And so there's not a lot of money in here prior to hiring a general manager. So the idea is that the co-op is running lean and mean up until the point where you say, yes, we're going to commit all of the resources of our co-op now to this project, right? We're putting it all at risk. At that point, Then hopefully up until that point, it's been running lean and mean, and then they move forward with the real expenditures. The startup staffing here is includes a portion of, so you're going to have clerks for a couple of weeks at least, stocking the store, receiving the goods, putting them on the shelf, getting orientation, training. Your department managers, longer than that, because they're going to have to be working with vendors, placing those startup orders, planning out where product is going to go in the store. And the general manager longer than that, because they're refining the equipment list, they're working with the contractors, they're working with the board. So all of that together in this particular model, I'm sorry, the general manager I have separate. So this 70,000 is department managers and clerks and things like that. The 64,000 is for the general manager. You have 30,000 for the site. So things like utilities or deposit, if you have to pay a deposit, those are all rolled into there. If you go out and you borrow money for this project, you're going to have to pay interest, probably just interest, but and the loan origination fees on those loans prior to opening. So we've got a number for that. And we have two more numbers, well, three more. One is the store is open and the produce department is not doing well, right? Stuff doesn't look good. It's not merchandised well. And the general manager is actually somebody who was good at, they were a deli manager previously. So the 20,000 is here so they can call in an expert from the outside and say, we need help. But we want you to have that money in the bank when you open so that it's available. And then we want you to have cash that will help carry the co-op to positive cash flow. So you can expect red in year one. You can expect red in year two when you get down to the cash flow at the bottom. But you need to have enough in the bank that you can, for lack of a better term, you can survive the negative cash flow, right? This carries you over until you start having positive cash flow. And then the last number, let me say this, Winston, and I'll turn it over to you. The last number here is a cost overrun allowance. So which these are all very general numbers and we have to be conservative. So we now have another $500,000 in here for things that we overlooked or things that actually turns out steel costs are up, wood costs are up. So construction costs are more than $120 a foot. Winston.
I was just going to say, these numbers are based on rules of thumb, and you still have some discretion. You do have thoughtful conversation to have of when I look at startup promotion, there's an $18,000 number there. If you know you're in a very expensive market and there's no, that this number needs to bump up, you would, as a board or a planning group, you're going to get in there and influence those numbers if you know more about your community or, I guess what I'm trying to say is these aren't hard and fast numbers. These are based on rules of thumb.
Yes, and the tendency is going to be like, well, what if we can, because of the what ifs, right? What if we can do interior improvements for $65 a square foot? But so what Winston is suggesting is that every change you make should be informed change, right? So that if you say, well, so for example, if you look at the market and you think we're going to be hard to get noticed, it's a big urban market, it's expensive, and we need to be advertising, then you've got to bump that up. If you sit down with a general contractor and they say, based on everything you're telling me, I think we can do this for $95 a foot, that's an informed change. But until you get that kind of information, you can play with the numbers, but you should not be presenting them to anybody as the potential outcomes, that represent what you think the co-op will do. Okay.
I was going to, one more thing, Don, I'm just going to tackle while we're here and the stage is set, is when you are talking to informed business partners, let's say the general contractor and so forth, remember that people are trying to court you. They're trying to attract your business. And it might be that I say, well, can Don Moffett Construction build my $125 a square foot project, you know, on time, on budget, and at the quality that I want? And Don's like, all that and more. We are a dream to work with. And, you know, we have, you know, everything you want, and we'll do it at $98 a square foot. Well, until Don is responsible for getting that project to me at $98 a square foot, I'm going to plan on what the, you know, the average market cost is. And even though it may be a little bit challenging to figure out how to come up with the sources for that, that cost estimate, it's a discipline I really advise you all to hold on to. Is your banker, I mean, everybody is trying to work with you. And so just be careful when it sounds too good to be true, kind of thing.
Okay, so we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to, so we're gonna, and I'm gonna do my best to end on time. Let me take you through. So if this co-op, if you remember the diagram that I showed you, and I'm going to show it to you again here. Well, I would if I could lay my eyes on it, but I can't, so I won't. The diagram that I showed you with the little box, and I said, these are all the costs, and now we have to raise the money. Some of it's not loans and some of it's loans. So that's what this is, very simplified. I keep saying that because this is not what you should expect when you get a pro forma, but some of it's similar. So there's 180,000. This is based on 1,200 people joining the co-op prior to opening at $150 each. This co-op went out and raised $1.5 million in member loans, which is loans. Then they got 25,000 in donations, which is not loans, right? That's in the top part of the box. They raised 1.5 million in grants. We love that. That's great, right? So that's in the not loans. Then they also were able to get, there's a couple of ways that new stores might be able to get support from distributors or manufacturers. They're counting on 42,000. That's, if it's free fill, which is first case on the shelf, that's a not loan, that's a gift. And then they're gonna go also, they're gonna get a $100,000 loan from an economic development agency and $250,000 from a foundation for what's called program related investment. This is a loan, not a gift. And they've raised $3,597,000, which if you look up to the total uses is 10,000 more than the cost of the project. Okay. Okay, now remember in the diagrams, when you have debt service. So that's this tab, which automatically calculates what that debt service is. So here's that $100,000 economic development loan. It has an interest rate, a payback period, and it says that the interest, this is year 3, the interest is $1,829. The principal payment is $14,000. You can see down here that the program related investment loan, the total interest and principal, and then because they borrowed 1.5 million from their owners at an average 4% interest in this model, they're also paying $60,000 in interest every year here. And you can see that I've got them starting to pay back those member loans out here in year 7. So this is all pretty much, the blue boxes are places where I enter numbers. All right, I'm going to show you, this is, I just have a few key operating assumptions. I do sales as though it was from a market study. That's where we get our numbers from. You get an expert to tell you based on your vision, based on the community, based on the site itself, what they think that will do in sales. So that's what would be here. But they based it on a 6,000 square foot store. This is a 5,200 square foot retail area. So we actually have to decrease the market study assumptions because it's a smaller space, right? There's an adjustment for that. Then there's an adjustment because when you open the store, you will be a new store. And so not everything will work the way you want it to. We'll cover this in great detail when you have a pro forma, but we adjust the sales down in the first year, 18%, in the second year, 12%, in the third year, 6%. These are adjustments down. And by the fourth year, we're expecting the store to be running on all cylinders and performing the way that the market analyst thought it would, given the size of the store. We are looking at gross margin. Remember, gross margin is the gross profit, which is what you have left after you've paid for the products that you've sold. And that's going to vary based on what you're envisioning selling. Natural and organic stores that sell mostly natural and organic foods, they might get a gross margin as high as 38.5% of sales, right? Every dollar, they're paying 61.5% to their vendors and keeping 38.5% to pay for everything else. A conventional supermarket, a small independent conventional supermarket may only be getting a 30% margin because they're actually, it's much more price competitive. And so they're selling, you think about, brands like Kellogg's, which you would expect to find in a mainline grocery store. So they're competing with a lot of people, it drives the prices down. They're paying 70% of their sales dollar to their vendors because they're getting less overall dollars. So they're keeping 30%. So in this particular one, I'm saying, it's a hybrid, 50-50, right? It's a mix of clean, conventional, and organic. And then it's got some rent. And then of course we have those, remember I came in the store and I joined the co-op in year one. Well, I'm in this group of 384 people. And so that first year we're seeing how much equity is coming in. And these, in this simplified, these are the things that are flowing over into the financial statements. So if you look at year one, like for example, there's 57,600. I'm just going to flip over here. Financial statements, I'm going to scroll down and look, 57,600. It goes through a couple of steps, but then it's saying in cash flow, this is cash coming in due to Don and 383 other people joining the co-op during year one. So I put a tab in here that is not in a typical pro forma. It's called what if, because in a typical pro forma, there are blue cells throughout, and you can look at each one of those and say, what if? But here I just pulled some up so that we could look very briefly at impacts. This is cash flow. Here, look at this line, year 9, right? This is going to be our cash flow. And notice what happens here. The first year, it's bad. The second year, it's not quite so bad. Our margins are better. Our personnel expense is a little more under control. And our sales are performing a little more strongly, right? By the third year, by the fourth year, we're almost there. And now we have positive cash flow. What happened? What happened was we said, well, we need to start paying back our member loans, right? So we could take the member loans out and we would, in fact, because those are 100,000, we would continue having positive cash flow in these years. But we have to figure out how to repay those member loans at some point. So we say, okay, I'm just going to show you a couple of what ifs. For example, watch cash flow end of year. Now, this is based on all the assumptions that are in this model, but I'm going to say 0 square feet for a community room, because you have to build a community room, but it doesn't actually add a lot in sales. So, because I already have it turned off. So watch what happens if I turn it on. So if I turn it on, the first year, right, is now 305,000. If I say no to the community room, the first year is about almost $50,000 improved on, and that's because we spent less to build out the building. So we have less debt service. We have less rent. because we're not paying rent on the community room. We have less utilities because we're not heating and cooling a community room. So these are things that if you're, if you have a lot of red in the pro forma, these are things you start looking at. What if we tried this? What if we tried that? And it would be great if I could come in. Well, let's just take a look. What if you got a 38 margin? I don't know. Let's take a look. So a 38 margin. And look what happened here. Here's your cash flow. Year one. And remember, now we're adding 3 points of margin. By year three, we're positive. And not only are we positive, but we're positive to the point that we can actually start paying back our member loans. And our cash never drops below 157,000. So, but you can't just plug 38% in. You have to look at what's behind the 38%, the product mix, the what are you planning to sell? So all of those things go into these assumptions, into your thoughts, into your thinking about it. I want to pause because I'm about to leave the pro forma with 5 minutes left, but I want to see if there are any questions. Or any other questions, because I have seen in Winston, are you also keeping an eye on the chat in the platform?
Yep, it's pretty quiet over there.
Okay, great. Okay, so I just want to take another couple of minutes. We covered a lot of stuff. My goal when we started was to, let's see, my goal when we started was to give you at least one new concept. And I hope that that's happened. I hope maybe there's a couple of insights that you're leaving with. The idea here is that, you start with vision. And at the pro forma process, that's really for the first time when we start looking at, are there limitations? Because up until the pro forma, you're pretty much free to imagine the co-op being whatever you want it to be. And then when we start doing the pro forma, we start trying to figure out, well, what does that really mean, right? Part of Winston's job and my job when we're doing pro forma is to imagine the vision in action. And what does that really mean in terms of numbers? And what are the results, right? So we have to say, what are the assumptions? What are the results? All in the pro forma. And then that tracks back. Now we're coming back and we're saying, let's look at what the results are. They may be positive, but maybe we need to actually look at like what parts of the vision need to change and what parts of the vision cannot change, because you have a vision. So if we said, well, you can make this co-op work by paying everyone minimum wage, very few of our clients would say, great, right? That's not a place that anybody is going to go. Anybody should go. It's not even something we would suggest, because neither Winston nor I think that that is equitable or even sustainable. So vision leads to the values that intersects with financial implications, which leads to the results, which leads to vision, and values that intersect with financial implications. So part of what we're doing is we're starting out with a draft pro forma with you, and then we're going with you through the process, the iterative process of continuing looking for the ways that you can shift your vision and to come up with something that's sustainable, something that you can actually go out and borrow money on, something that will make the co-op work. I want to appreciate you all for spending an hour and a half. I've been keeping an eye on the number of participants, and we had one person that left to go to work, and everybody else has stayed. And I appreciate that. Winston and I are here to be of service to you all. Our email addresses are our first name, last name @colluminate.coop. Please feel free to reach out anytime with questions about today, questions about your co-op, anything that we can help with. Winston, you have anything you want to wrap up with?
No, I'm just really excited to be going over this. It's such a huge tool and such a great process, and really appreciate you all's stick to itness to get through it, because I know it can be a little bit much, but it's a really awesome tool.
Let's see here. I am going to stop sharing so I can see those of you have your cameras on. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for participating in Up and Coming. Deb, thank you for finding a way to do Up and Coming. It was, I'll say this, Up and Coming was the last thing I did last year before I got home and started sheltering in place. I am so much looking forward to seeing all of you in person in 2022.
We are looking forward to seeing you guys in person as well. Fingers crossed that that we're able to do that.
Thank you, everybody. We're
Thanks,
out.
everyone.